Today I'm going to talk about my Spellbinders Grand Calibur die cutting machine and the plates that came with it. And there's also a rubber mat used for embossing dies. There's the base plate, which is A, the cutting plate, which is C, and the embossing plate, which is B. They're all different colors. The base plate is gray, the cutting plate is white, the embossing plate is pink, and the rubber mat is like a tan color. So my die cutting machine cuts thin metal etched dies, and here's an example of one. This one is a tree shape. It's going to cut an advent calendar. The front of the die is the side that has the cutting edges, which are raised, but they're not sharp enough to hurt your hands. And then the back is completely smooth. And on this die, you'll notice that the numbers are cut out, and that means that the numbers can be embossed because there's no metal where the numbers are. So the first thing that you have to do when you're die cutting or embossing is choose which material you're going to use. And today I'm using this piece of cardstock. It's a glittery silver, and this is the front side, and then the back side is kind of white. So the first really important tip when you're die cutting or embossing is that whatever side you want to be the front has to be touching your die on the cut edges, so that when we cut it, it's going to have to be completely covered. And now you see the back of the material and not the front. So the first step when you're die cutting is you always need your base plate, and you need your cutting plate. Every time when I cut, I flip and sometimes rotate my plates to prevent warping, or if your plates are getting warped and you do this, it will help bend them back so that they become flatter again. So first, insert the sandwich with just the base plate. Then we put die with the cutting edges up on the base plate. Then I'm covering it with my cardstock. I've got to align it so that the entire die is covered by cardstock, because I want the entire tree to cut out. And then lastly, I have my cutting plate, which goes on top like that. So I have my full sandwich now. And then with my machine, I have to lift up my plates to put it into the Grand Calibur like this. It has a little bit of a tray. And then as I start to feed it in, I start to turn the crank. And it also has a handle on mine so that I can hold on my other hand while I turn. And how the machine cuts it is with pressure from the plates and from the die itself, because it's made out of metal, which is a much stronger material than cardstock. So I've unrolled it. Now I'm going to check my result. So I'm going to take off the cutting plate. All right. And on this one, the die cut came out of my die, which is fine. And so we'll show you here that now I have a calendar, and it has little openings like a little advent calendar would. But you'll notice we don't have any numbers yet. So the next step is going to be to emboss. So I'm going to set aside my extra piece of excess cardstock that we didn't use. And the first thing I have to do is, I think I'm going to rotate my base plate slightly here because I don't want it to warp. And then I'm going to put the die cut back into the die. So the front side of the die cut has to go inside of the die. And then I kind of press it down with my fingers to give it enough. So I feel like it's going to stay in there. And then we need the rubber mat. It goes next. It goes right over top. And then the last piece of the sandwich is the embossing plate. What the embossing mat does is it provides pressure, but not as much pressure as when the cutting plate is used. So if you emboss, it will not cut, which is why we had to cut first. So now I'm going to run it through the machine just like you ran it through to cut, but since it's a different sandwich, it's going to have a different result. Okay. Now on my machine, I get a little bit of static there. You hear it? And then I take off the rubber mat, which also has some static. That's okay. And now, this time the die cut stayed in the die. I can lift it up. Now I can show you that I have all 25 of the numbers on this advent calendar. And that is how, at least with this die, cut first and then emboss for this result.